Everyone to the March 30th, 2021 COVID-19 clinical rounds focused on the inpatient-outpatient interface, outpatient therapy as inpatient surge mitigator. My name is Richard Hunt. I'm an emergency physician who serves as senior medical advisor at the National Preparedness Programs in the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Preparedness and Response at the United States Department of Health and Human Services. The purpose of these rounds are peer-to-peer, real-time sharing of COVID-19 clinical challenges and successes. If I'm a clinician caring for COVID patients, the clinicians I want to learn from are those with the most experience. This is a voluntary public-private collaboration, and thanks to the multiple professional organizations who have collaborated on these rounds. These rounds are not intended to be redundant or replace any organization's initiatives. They are intended to be sharing of clinical experience rather than recommendations or guidance. These ECHO clinical rounds you are now participating in are focused on clinicians sharing their successes and challenges with other clinicians. Thanks to the National Emerging Special Pathogen Training and Education Center for their support with these rounds. NETEC's webinars complement these Project ECHO COVID-19 clinical rounds. Notably, last week they did a webinar, NETEC webinar, on Ebola in the context of, by the way, we still have COVID-19 in a substantial way. Thanks to Project ECHO, Dr. Bruce Strumminger and his team for the peer-to-peer learning platform we use for these rounds. Upcoming ECHO COVID-19 clinical rounds are all US noon Eastern time. Mondays are EMS, Tuesdays, today, critical care, and Thursdays are emergency department. This coming Thursday's emergency department rounds, in recognition of multiple conversations we've had in the chat for these rounds, plus dialogue among our panelists and speakers around workforce and staffing shortages and staffing challenges. We're going to be having a fourth-year medical student who just matched in emergency medicine, and in addition to her presentation, we'll also have the immediate past president of the Emergency Medicine Residents Association present. ECHO will now be going over some logistics, and I'll turn this over to Amanda Dezan from Project ECHO. Thank you.
Thanks. Hi, my name is Amanda. I'm with Project ECHO. Just some quick logistics to go over before we get started. Down in the bottom of your Zoom screen, you'll see a Q&A function. We ask that you use that for any questions or comments you have regarding the presentation or discussion. There's also a chat function on Zoom, and so please use that for any questions regarding technical or logistic issues, and we'll do our best to help you. Today's session, like all our other ones, is being recorded, and your attendance is consent to be recorded, so thank you for that. Some of the presentations from today are linked to the most recent email announcement from Project ECHO, and all will be shared on our website along with a link to the recording once that's ready to go. We do provide CME and continuing professional development credits from the University of New Mexico, where Project ECHO is based. We'll put a link in about the last 15 minutes in the chat, and the link is also available in the email announcement that went out from Project ECHO this morning. A quick reminder to everybody that these sessions are focused on improving patient care and health systems and supporting clinicians, so we appreciate everybody keeping it apolitical and non-commercial. A quick note on data use. While we do collect data via registration, the chat, the Q&A, and other interactive parts of this, we do keep everything totally private and confidential, and individual data is not shared with HHS, ASPR, or any of the other organizations. You can read our full data use policy here on the screen. As mentioned, NETEC is a collaborating partner on these, and they do have a webinar series on COVID-19. I believe they don't have any planned at the moment, but you can go to their website and see any that are scheduled for the future, or watch recordings of past webinars that they've had. A quick reminder to everybody that AAMC is also a partner, and they have a continually updated COVID-19 clinical guidance repository. We can put a link in the chat for that, or you can go to the website at the top of the page here, and we highly recommend checking that out. And that is it from me on logistics, so back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Amanda. It's a pleasure to have Dr. Jeff Dichter with us today, who has done an extraordinary job of helping coordinate and moderate these critical care series of rounds for the past few weeks. Today, he's had a number of other critical care leaders join him on this important topic. I'm now going to turn it over to Dr. Dichter. Jeff, and thank you for all the work you've done to coordinate these.
Thank you, Rick. Appreciate it. Good morning, everybody, and good afternoon for those on the East Coast and further east in the East Coast. The topic that we chose today was inpatient-outpatient interface, and really looking at outpatient therapy as surge mitigators. I know that for those of us who spend a lot of our lives in public health and in the inpatient setting, providing care as critical care doctors or hospitalists or emergency medicine, or all the breadth of things that we do, we look to the future with a little bit of concern, as there may be we worry about another surge that may be coming. So all the skills we've learned for the past year are still really important to us. Something I think for most of us, certainly for me, that I don't feel as though I understand quite as well as I'd like to, is the significance of some of the new therapies against COVID-19, and particularly the monoclonal antibodies and some of the other similar medications. There's some evidence that may really significantly improve, the risk that patients have if they do contract the disease. And so we wanted to be able to provide this update for all of us to get the cutting edge information. I'm truly grateful for those we have presenting to us today. Dr. Raymond Reasonable from the Mayo Clinic, who has extensive experience with these, who will share with us. Dr. John Redd, the Chief Medical Officer from the Office of the Assistant Secretary of Preparedness Response, one of the organizations, or the organization that sponsors clinical rounds, and truly exceptional clinician with a lot of breadth of experience, especially in the therapies that we're talking about today. And Nina Haste, our PharmD from University of California, San Diego Health, also very experienced in the medications that we'll be talking about today. And so I'm grateful to all of them. And Raymond, we'll go ahead and start with you. And I know that you have a presentation that you'd like to present a few slides. So I'm going to go ahead and ask you to go ahead and pull them up and go ahead and get started, please.
Thank you so much, Jeff, for having me.
A pleasure.
Can you see the slides okay?
You can.
Okay, perfect. Sounds good. Well, I'm glad to be able to kind of present to you today the Mayo Clinic experience on the administration of monoclonal antibodies in patients with mild to moderate COVID. These are my disclosures. And as you all know, the monoclonal antibodies had received emergency use authorization from the FDA. The first one was bamlanivimab way back on November 9, followed by the cocktail of casirivimab, imdevimab on November 21st, and most recently, the combination of bamlanivimab and etesevimab on February 9, 2021. And we had anticipated that these are going to happen. So like many other institutions, we were not ready at the start because we don't have outpatient facilities that will be able to infuse these monoclonal antibodies to patients who are supposed to be in the outpatient setting. So what we've done is, through the help of leadership, we had set up monoclonal antibody infusion centers across our sites. As you may know, Mayo Clinic is located in the states of Minnesota, Wisconsin, part of northern Iowa. We also have sites in Arizona as well as Florida. So infusion centers were created that was independent from the traditional infusion therapy centers at these locations, mainly in the major hubs of Rochester for Minnesota, Eau Claire for Wisconsin, Jacksonville in Florida, as well as Phoenix in Arizona. Plus, we also know that we have outlying community hospitals as well as critical access hospitals that will need to be equipped with these facilities so that we can serve patients in rural communities as well. In addition, one of the challenges was to staff these facilities. And at the time, we were in the middle of an upsurge way back in around November, December, at least in the states of Minnesota and Wisconsin. And our leadership had basically made sure that this is going to be one of our efforts to mitigate the influx of patients in the hospital setting, and basically facilitated a rapid development of these infusions. We have made sure that we have facilities as well as personnel to implement the program, and we call ourselves the Matrix Monoclonal Antibody Treatment Team that's composed of multiple specialties, including medical, non-medical, as well as support administrative staff. We even have ethics as part of our team, as well as legal, to make sure that we are in compliance with regulations with the administration of these antibodies. We meet every day, particularly during the surge, and this is facilitated by the virtual Zoom, just like what we're doing now, wherein each member of the team calls in to make sure that all the eligible patients are screened, as well as the processes are moving forward as smoothly as possible. What we have learned early on is many patients are not aware of the drugs. They don't know what the drugs are. It hasn't really been widely advertised. So when we call them, they say they don't know about it. They are somewhat hesitant because it's not yet fully FDA approved, and that many of the societies have not really endorsed the products way back at around November. Plus, many of them have mild symptoms, and they say they don't really need treatment because they don't feel that bad. So we have created patient education materials as well as videos to emphasize the fact that this works best when it's given early, as well as before the patients become moderate, become severely ill. We also partnered with our community hospitals, as well as other healthcare providers that serve the underrepresented populations. The homeless shelters, we partnered with them, as well as dialysis units, as well as long-term care facilities. Just to point out that early on, we learned that even during outbreaks, many of our long-term care facilities, nursing homes, really cannot transport their patients to the infusion centers. So we have created a mobile unit that goes to these facilities to infuse patients because of the frailty as well as limitation for traveling. This is basically our processes slide. We are mostly a proactive program because we are a major testing center. We know who tests positive. So we've created a system wherein all positive tests on patients that are eligible gets into a registry that gets into our algorithm for screening as well as consenting. In addition, we also have a pathway that will entertain patients who have been tested elsewhere, as well as patients outside of our institutions who may have been referred. So those are the two pathways. One, we actively screen and reach out to patients, and we also have a process of a referral system. All of them will go into so-called a monoclonal antibody screening score. So this is a scoring system that we developed early on way back in November that assigned a weight to the different comorbidities that makes you eligible to develop to receive monoclonal antibodies. And we did this in case there was a scarcity in resources, because we wanted to make sure that we give it to the people that are at highest risk at that time. It turned out, however, that there was not scarcity of resources as well as supplies. So, but we are using this basically to assess our data, as well as to make sure that everybody that gets the drug are eligible based on the FDA, EUA eligibility criteria. There's a manual process just to make sure that they are within 10 days of onset of symptoms, for example. And then everybody that is eligible will then get called by our team for patient education, consenting, as well as scheduling for infusion. And we have done pretty good in terms of our process. Our median time from a positive test result to infusion is about 2 to 3 days. And as you can see in this slide, most will come in at around day 1, day 2, or day 3. We started way back in November, and this is our volume of infused patients through the end of, this is a slide that goes through the end of January. And as you could see, the peak is at around end of December, early January, when we had infused as high as almost 650 patients per week at that time. And it had kind of slowed down, but it appears to remain steady at a constant pace during this time as well. These are our milestones. Our program started way back on November 9, but we didn't receive the drugs until November 18. Hence, the first drug that was infused in our facilities was on the 19th, and we've ramped up the infusions. And we are now over 4,600 since we started the program. And we also, just like what I said, reach out to nursing homes, homeless shelters, underserved populations, so that they are also given the drugs if they are eligible. We have described our process. For those that are interested, it is out online. To describe the details of the program is available in this. You can take a photo of the screen if you want to kind of reach out and look at that details of that paper. And this is what we see. And this basically confirms the need to create some sort of risk strata. And these are the hospitalization rate for patients who were not given monoclonal antibody because they declined infusion. And as you can see here, the lower the comorbidity, the lower is the risk for admission, but the higher the comorbidity score, the higher is the risk for hospitalization during the first 28 days after testing positive. And our data is shown here. This is very preliminary and just basically reflects the initial data analysis during the first part of our program. The blue line are the patients who were given bamlanivimab infusion. And these are hospitalization through day 40 after enrollment. And because this is an EUA and it's not really a randomized controlled trial, we had difficult time trying to kind of, how do we know if it's working? So we created some sort of a match control from patients that did not receive monoclonal antibody. And this is the rate of hospitalization. But as you could see here, there's a divergence in the line suggesting that monoclonal antibodies do work in preventing hospitalizations. We are in the process of looking at other clinical outcomes, including mortality as well as intensive care unit admissions. So the Mayo monoclonal antibody program shows that this is a safe and effective drug, particularly for patients who are at high risk. Our program involves a multidisciplinary team. We are a more proactive than a passive program because we reach out to patients that are identified through our system. The leadership support has really been amazing, making sure that the physical and the electronic infrastructure to make this happen was done really rapidly, and the flexibility of our staff, because patients who may not be able to come to our centers, we develop a fleet or a mobile unit that goes to them. Plus, the outcomes that we analyze, partnership with our analytical team, just to make sure that what we're doing is actually doing for the good of our patients. And this has basically fueled us to move further forward because we know what we're doing is the right thing to do. And that's the Mayo program. Thank you for having us present today.
Wow, Raymond, that was a great presentation. And I have to have a little bit of a disclosure, not a disclaimer, a disclosure, because I have a chance to see you do this at the Minnesota Department of Health and our scientific advisory team. It was really impressive, and I'm truly grateful to have you to share it today. John, why don't we go ahead and have you go ahead and share with us, and Nina, we'll have you, and then after John, and then we'll go ahead and have a discussion at that point. Go ahead, Dr. John Rudd.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. And boy, there's loads of things to talk about after Ray's talk, but I'm going to have a bunch of comments. I am going to try to skip through things that we may have hit from Minnesota. What I wanted to focus on today was primarily to look at ways that the monoclonal antibodies fit into our current strategy in terms of overall COVID therapy, and then to go through some of the data on the ways in which they can avoid admissions, which of course for this audience today is extremely important. So I have to say that when the monoclonals came out on November 9th by EUA, they filled a huge gap in our armamentarium here in the United States, which is in early symptomatic patients
John, we lost you.
Both antiviral therapies and immune modulator therapies. The immune modulators that we're familiar with, those generally come up later in someone's course. But just to reinforce that the monoclonal antibodies fit into outpatient, early symptomatic patients, so very early in their course. In terms of evidence that led to the granting of the emergency use authorization, let's go through some of these, and I'm not going to go too much in detail. I'm going to hit some high points here. As people have mentioned, the primary outcome for these antibodies has generally been day 29, or essentially a 30-day measure of either subsequent hospitalization or medical visit of any kind. And in some cases, it's been specifically an emergency department visit. The point is two things. First, you're dealing with outpatients in whom, even in people with risk factors, the likelihood of death in those patients is relatively low if you take all comers. So it can be tough to prove a death benefit with something like these monoclonal antibodies for SARS-CoV-2 that hit patients very early in their course. So let's look at some of these combined outcomes and look particularly at hospitalizations or death at day 29, because the numbers are impressive and they're very consistent, and they are consistent among different products. If you look in the center column here, that's a combination product by Eli Lilly, bamlanivimab and etesevimab. And if you look in the middle there, the look at hospitalizations and death at day 29, there's an 87% relative reduction in risk versus placebo. Remember, this is in Blaze 1, which was a placebo-controlled trial. And furthermore, there were no deaths in the BAM-EDI arm, and there were 4 out of 258 patients died in the placebo arm. So there was a suggestion of a death benefit here. And in terms of casirivimab and imdevimab, which is the Regeneron product, similarly, looking at hospitalizations and death at day 29, there was a 70% relative risk reduction. I'm going to talk in a moment about what that adds up to in terms of numbers needed to treat, because remember, both the absolute risk reduction and the relative risk reduction both count quite a bit in all of our systems. So in general, bottom line here is that these products in general can avoid approximately 80% of hospitalizations or visits, and possibly, let's say, death in patients with risk factors. So looking at those results, in whom have they been authorized? And there are a few key points I want to hit. And all of these are exactly the points that Ray and other colleagues have taken into at programs that give these medicines. So they're intended for mild to moderate early cases. The patient has to be confirmed. However, the confirmation can be either a positive PCR or a rapid antigen test. And I got to be clear, in most of the settings in which we are trying to give these medications, a rapid test is very, very appropriate, because remember, the person's symptomatic, and the pretest probability of even a rapid antigen test is very high. It's crucial to get them into patients as early as possible following the positive test, but under EUA, it has to be within 10 days of symptom onset. Patient has to not be hospitalized or needing O2. Someone who's on baseline oxygen, whose requirement has gotten larger, is eligible. And I'm not going to go over these in detail, but I want to point out a couple eligibility criteria that you all should know about. In adults, the big ones are BMI greater than or equal to 35 and age greater than or equal to 65. Either of those characteristics is present, patient is symptomatic, early with a positive test, they're eligible. And I think all of us here would agree that it's really important to get those people into treatment. And then there are other criteria regarding chronic illness. And then there are analogous criteria for adolescents from 12 to 17 years of age. So let's go over the administration quickly. I have that first column, which is bamlanivimab. I hope you can see it. It's sort of blanked out because we are no longer shipping plain bamlanivimab. The product now is the second column, which is bamlanivimab etesevimab. So BAM-ETI. And then the third column is casirivimab imdevimab by Regeneron. And that's because of evidence that I'll turn to a little bit later on resistance to monotherapy bamlanivimab. So the patients are the products are given as outpatient infusions. The infusion time really is not bad. Over time it's gotten much less. The best case scenario is around 20 minutes for either of these products, Regeneron or Lilly products. And then the patients observe for an hour. So in the most efficient settings, we've seen that you can get a patient in, infuse them, observe them for an hour within around 2 hours total. And I should say both products go into normal saline. So this is the part I wanted to really hit because the audience for this talk are people who practice critical care and who therefore practice with inpatients. So let's look at how these products work. And we're going to go through the number needed to treat. And as a bit of a refresher, the number needed to treat is the inverse of the change in absolute risk. For example, if you've got something that a baseline risk is 15%, and with treatment, you reduce the risk to 5%, that is an absolute risk reduction of 10%. That means number needed to treat is 10, meaning for every 10 patients you've treated, you've avoided the outcome. And the key feature here is that in these products, the number needed to treat, it varies a little bit based on the setting, but it is very consistent and it's powerful evidence for using them. The ones that I would really turn your attention to are the monotherapy bamlanivimab. That was the blaze that we mentioned before, and it was done, of course, before the EUA authorization. And that led to a number needed to treat of approximately 10. But if you look at the bottom line there on the bottom, what's interesting is that the placebo arm, if you look at the third row down, the placebo arms vary in terms of the subsequent hospitalization rate, 6.3%, 15%, 7%, 9%. And that's because the characteristics of the placebo-controlled population vary in terms of baseline risk factors. But the number needed to treat is between 10 and 20, and now this is getting repeated again and again. I wanted to mention and then go through briefly some experience that Asper's had at our infusion sites. We did them at 3 places in California, Nevada, and Tucson. And we have collected data there, which we're in the process of analyzing with a comparator group of untreated people in the same system. One nice thing about this cohort that we've assembled through the Asper-supported treatments is that they were in an underserved population. So we've got some real world, non-majority white population results, which I'll share briefly in a second. So there are different models we use. This is the tent model, closely affiliated with an ER. This is a great idea. This was an unused observation section of a hospital. Those are DMAT personnel there. And I should mention, this is when we were setting up. They're not in PPE because there were no patients yet. And this was a great model to use a part of the hospital that's not being used because you're not doing outpatient surgeries or what have you. And then this is another tent model put up in the parking lot, which is quite workable. We had quite a bit of interest from the media, which was very, very helpful because we've heard from a couple people that, as we said, it's been difficult to get people to know about it. This was our 500th patient at Tucson who very happily was willing to be tweeted and recovered very quickly. So let's talk very quickly about the variants. And this is something, of course, that we're all concerned about. And the reason is that, of course, these antibodies are against the spike protein. And if there's a variant that is changing the characteristics of the proteins that make up the spike protein, then, of course, there's a chance that the monoclonals might not fit as well. You can look and see here, this is monotherapy bamlanivimab. So bamlanivimab alone. One nice thing is that I'll get out of the way is that the UK variant, the B117, there's no change in susceptibility. And so even as the UK variant is becoming more prevalent in the United States, it has not changed in terms of its susceptibility to bamlanivimab. And but you can see some of these other variants do have a change in susceptibility, and that's the reason that we're no longer shipping monotherapy bamlanivimab. The research on the combination product is excellent, and the variants in the United States are treatable by the combination products. This is a copy and paste from this morning. This is just to get this up to date. We've now delivered in the U.S. government support almost a million courses. And back in the envelope math, that will have avoided at least 100,000 hospitalizations in the United States, which we're very happy with. So I'll stop there, and those are the things I wanted to emphasize, and looking forward to taking questions in the discussion. Thank you.
Wow, John, that was a great presentation. Thank you. And Nina, excuse me, Nina from UC San Diego Health, and I know from your pharmacy experience, I just wanted to, you're more, my guess is you're more experienced with the medications per se. What are the things based on your experience that you can share with us about these?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for inviting me. It's an honor to present with these great presenters. And I was just taking some notes because I don't want to be too redundant. I think a lot of things were covered, but what I might do is a quick kind of timeline, similar to what's been done in terms of the ramp up. So at UC San Diego Health, when we first heard that these medications were available in November, at least for bamlanivimab, we set up a plan, a work group, because the first question that we had was how are we going to administer these? Where are we going to administer them? How are we going to do it in a safe environment? And so, in terms of the setup, getting information, the medication build in our electronic record, creating a treatment plan that had kind of safety parameters. So, in case there was an infusion reaction, not knowing what risk some of these patients would have and how they would be monitored. Taking it through our pharmacy and therapeutics committee, ensuring that our institution would be supportive of providing these medications in this environment. We got ethics involved. We had a whole group of nurses, pharmacists, physicians, our ID team, and worked with our infusion center to determine could we allocate a small area that would be a safe contact precaution situation that we could basically provide these medications in a fashion that was safe for both our employees and the patients. And so we set that up in terms of we have EPIC at our institution. And so we have a large group of interdisciplinary members and a very great group of infectious disease physicians that run a virtual COVID clinic. And this virtual COVID clinic was already set up in terms of every positive test. Every patient would then be referred to this virtual COVID clinic before these MABs were set up. It's run by or led by Dr. Shelley Ritter, and so we already had that system of that COVID clinic in place. And so what we used is that kind of system with the nurses and logistics, et cetera, to then have patients referred to that clinic so that we can introduce them to this potential treatment option. And if they were symptomatic and they met the criteria that was presented, we basically provided the option to have them come in and get scheduled in the infusion center. And we learned along the way that we needed ethics really because we had a supply issue and timing issue in terms of number of beds. And so we worked with our ethics team, we worked with our infectious disease experts that were involved in the ACTIV-2 trial as well to try to identify the best approach for these patients. And we have a lot of immunocompromised patients at our institution. We serve transplant patients, bone marrow transplant patients, a lot of rheumatoid arthritis and other patients on immunosuppressants. And one of the big questions that we had was when the EUA says that these are designated for immunosuppressed populations, as well as BMI greater than 35, et cetera, which medications are classified under that. And so we worked with our ethics team to allocate and determine kind of a point system so that we could say if our supply or our demand outweighed our supply, that we could then have a point system to say that perhaps this patient should be scheduled before another. And that was really stressful, especially during the surge. Luckily, we were able to get some more supply, and then our supply of beds in terms of availability to actually infuse kind of outweighed anything at that time. And basically, we haven't done the numbers that the Mayo Clinic has done, or many other centers, but we've infused over 150 patients or so, and I could say that just anecdotally, we've had great success in reducing hospital admissions, and I think during the surge that really mitigated that surge, especially our immunosuppressed populations and coming into the hospital. A couple timing things that I would love to hear some of the other members on the call discuss. Some of the questions that came up during this time was obviously the variants. So we quickly switched from using bamlanivimab to using casirivimab and devimab in December, and kind of focusing on that, given the knowledge of the variants that potentially were in the community. And then in terms of vaccine timing, so one of our questions that came up, especially in December with the EUA vaccines, was, how can we time these effectively post infusions? And so we continue to engage in these discussions, discuss with some of the experts leading in the field. But it's a very contemporary question that I think we continue to learn from. So that's, I think all the other points have been really discussed from the colleagues in the call. And like I said, I'm happy to answer additional questions, but those are some of the considerations that we took into setting this up from a pharmacy perspective, in this coordination with the physicians, the nurses, infusion center, and the whole team. And I really have to give a shout out to the UCSD team that I'm a part of in setting this up quickly and getting these patients treated with these exciting new therapies.
Thank you, Nina. And one of the, I'll go ahead and start off, and Asha, you can, if there are questions, I know there's a few questions in the chat box, and others may have questions as well. One of the things that impresses me is that all of you were able to set up these infusion centers and get them up and running. And it sounds like you could get patients through minimum 2 hours, but probably close to that on the other end. What problems or complications? Did you see any problems or complications with patients as you started to move patients through your different places? Were there any allergic reactions or anaphylaxis, or what kinds of medical and clinical and logistic things did you find?
I can start.
Raymond,
Yep,
yeah.
I can start. So the most common side effects that we have seen are chills. That's pretty much it. Of the patients that we've infused so far, we're now over at around 4,600 patients. We have not seen an anaphylactic reaction that ever has happened, but we are prepared. Infusion centers should be ready to have those medications available in case there's an anaphylaxis that may happen, but we have not seen that.
This is John. I got to say, we had very similar results. We haven't seen any anaphylaxis. And there's some nausea, and we slow down the infusion a little bit, and that usually handles it. If I can ask a question back to Nina, maybe thought we should bring up whether a site has central mixing of the products or mixing right near the patient. That's a clinical decision that's come up many times.
Yeah, great question, Don. So to answer the previous question, we had similar responses, and some of the responses that are actually been added to the EUAs in terms of kind of watching these patients a little bit more closely in some situations. In terms of central compounding of the products, that's exactly what we do. So we have our infusion center at where we're giving this is actually part of on a floor of a hospital, and it's an outpatient infusion center. And so we've designated a certain area of that for infusion of these MABs. And so this outpatient, quote unquote, location within the hospital has served as our location, but our hospital central dispensing area pharmacy has been preparing these medications. We chose to go that way at the beginning, obviously with the initial setup of the EUAs. I think that a number of areas in the county, at least San Diego County or elsewhere in California, have move towards alternative setups as well to ensure that this can be administered more readily. But given the constraints of the initial setup and the initial kind of preparation, it was safest and most effective to do this in the central dispensing area. And these are both refrigerated medications as well. So I'd like to ask how the mobile clinic went and how that coordination with the preparation on the mobile clinic for the Mayo Clinic worked out as well.
Yeah, so for our mobile unit, we still use the preferably the central pharmacy dispensing. So what our team does is we identify patients that are supposed to be infused like either late today or tomorrow, and our pharmacy team partner knows how many patients we are infusing at a specific facility. So they prepare it the night before. And ready for the shipment when the vehicle leaves for the infusion centers at 7 o'clock in the morning. And in cases like that, we actually had originally preferred casirivimab imdevimab from Regeneron just because it has a longer half-life after you reconstitute it, because what we've seen previously is even if we prepared like, let's just say 10 products for 10 patients. When we go there may be some patients who may be too sick to qualify for eligibility. So we don't want to waste the extra drugs so that when it comes back, we could still use it for other patients.
These are,
Go ahead, Carol.
I'm Carol Cunningham, the State Medical Director for the Ohio Department of Public Safety Division, EMS. And in Ohio, the infusion of monoclonal antibodies is within the scope of practice for paramedics. I was just wondering if in your systems, if you've incorporated paramedics into your workforce, either in the on-site or in particularly the mobile units that you've deployed.
That is correct. And actually, we have engaged with them, particularly for our team that goes to the homeless shelters. So we have partnered with our community paramedics to make that happen in those circumstances.
Thank you.
If I may follow up briefly, I just want to add a great note of enthusiasm for use of paramedics for this treatment. It's a great model, and it fits, in my opinion, right over home plate in terms of paramedics' scope of practice and their abilities. So that's a great model.
Hey, John, just to add on, because this is the Critical Care Tuesday sessions, it's been actually fascinating to listen on the EMS rounds, which are antibodies. We had an entire session on monoclonal antibodies, and you know, with EMS medical directors championing that, along with public health and the interface with large institutions that have really taken this on. It's another one of those unanticipated wins, in that it's not just like, okay, we're going to go like stand by, but we're actually going to make a difference very differently than picking up a patient who's critically ill and you absolutely know that that patient is going to go south no matter what happens. And what's been really gratifying, and John, I learned about these monoclonals from you at the beginning, is how, you know, there was this vision that it would give hope in ways that we hadn't seen for a long time. And my observation, listening both on the critical care rounds now, and then the entire series that we've done with Echo on monoclonals, and then the EMS rounds on this, it really has given hope and optimism, along with the vaccines that hadn't been there for a long time. So thank you.
I also think it's an invaluable asset, particularly in the rural areas where you may not have that many nurses to go out into the area, as well as you don't have that many hospital beds to put patients in who deteriorate. So I'm curious to see how many rural areas will incorporate paramedics in that role.
And I think that's really important. Looking at our mobile unit, our team had traveled as far as 70 miles away from site just to infuse at some of the facilities, for example. And they're very thankful because many patients actually don't even have the transportation mechanism to get to the infusion center. So we have to create pathways for them.
There's some burning questions in the chat group that are very interesting, mainly regarding the variants. Are there new monoclonal antibodies targeting those variants? And then do any of you have experience in terms of prevention of long haul symptoms? I mean, anecdotally, I think it's amazing how it kind of just shuts off progression of COVID symptoms. But are any of you watching for that data?
That is the plan, at least for the Mayo program, that to kind of look at the longer term outcomes, not only at hospitalization, but 3 months or 6 months from now, how do they compare to those who did not get treated? So we have a registry being looked into, but I think it's too early to say for now, just because the antibodies were just available like late November. And then you had other question about the variants. Yep, we look into that. Like for example, Minnesota is still predominantly a UK variant that we see. The BAM alone should work based on that data was presented by John coming from the CDC. But we are really concerned that as the other variants emerge, like the South African variant, for example, or the Brazilian variant, that BAM alone may not work. And I think that's the reason why they stopped shipping BAM alone to sites. It has to be combined with etesevimab.
This is just John. I can follow up a little bit. And in terms of variants, one really fascinating response by FDA to the variants is that they've said that down the road, should it be necessary, that they would be open to giving an emergency use authorization to either a new mRNA-based vaccine or a new monoclonal antibody therapy based upon not full placebo-controlled clinical data, but rather neutralization data, for example. In other words, how well the antibody sticks. So what that means is that we hope that should we need it, that we should be able to even to get to this faster than we did the first time around. So I thought that was really a great response.
Yeah, if I may. I mean, this is one of the strengths of the new emerging vaccine technologies that we're seeing now, that, knowing that with the mRNA vaccines in particular, we can just, plug in the new sequence, switch a couple C's to G's, and you have a new vaccine generated very rapidly. And, and of course, there is precedence for this. This is what we do with the influenza vaccine every year, right? With every year we take prevailing strains and generate a vaccine, and we don't do a phase 3 influenza vaccine trial for Afluria every single year. So that's based on a very well-established FDA process. I'm just curious for the group, not to derail us at all, but any thoughts or any interest in, since we're talking about early therapies for people who don't yet require critical care services, about molnupiravir, the oral antiviral developed usually by Emory and Ridgeback with EIDD 2801, if anyone has seen any of this yet. As something maybe an adjunct or perhaps something we've used in addition to monoclonals. I will take that as a no.
Well, no, sorry, Ryan. Yeah. I'm working on an answer in the chat. I apologize. But what I can say is we are hoping for authorizations in parts of multiple phases of the whole spectrum of illness, all the way from preventive therapies to oral antivirals to adjuncts for hospitalized patients.
On that theme, I have a quick question. Now that we know that the variants are highly transmissible, we're seeing a little bit of an uptick, our hospitalizations and some morbidity and mortality are impacting people under the age of 65 who have not been in the tier for full complete vaccination. Will there be expansion of the EUA criteria for monoclonal antibody therapies and eligibility? One thing that I, as an outpatient pulmonologist, I find, what's the difference between a 17-year-old with asthma and a 48-year-old with chronic asthma?
Well, the EUA basically says that the 17-year-old with asthma will qualify, but the 48 will not.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know the reasoning behind that, but if you look at our data, at least on the adult side, wherein we compared the risk of hospitalization between those with a risk score of 1 or 0 compared to those with a risk score higher than 3, for example, the rate of hospitalization is really significantly different. So I think the 48-year-old with asthma probably has a much low, it definitely has a much lower risk, but I don't know if whether that will qualify the patient for an EUA at this time. There's some that's also the question that we have been asking ourselves, but just because we're limited by the strict criteria, we cannot. And another thing that actually fell off as the list as soon as they turned 18 are those with neurodevelopmental disorders that, you know, they don't go away after you turn 18, right? They're still there, particularly those with difficult respiratory issues that are trach dependent, for example. If they're between 18 and 55, they don't qualify, but to me, they should.
So John, Aisha and I have discussed this before. I'll be very quick. You know, I do want to be very clear that we don't recommend that sites that are administering the therapeutic spend a lot of time. In fact, I don't recommend they spend any time second guessing the judgment of a clinician who has sent somebody in. And we had this come up at our sites, and we tried to, you know, get people to move through as quickly as possible. It's not worth it. And so that, I guess that's all I'll say about that. The EUA criteria are what they are, but we give a lot of latitude, as we should, to clinical judgment.
Agree.
Yeah, that's kind of how we've worked with our ethics team as well, in deciding and with this point system to try to allocate as best appropriately and you know, use the clinical decision making of the provider to guide. And there's one question in there in terms of plans to scale up in terms of delivery. I wanted to kind of circle back to the challenges of compounding. And now that these are all like dual therapies that come in separate vials, I think that'll be a point of trying to scale up. It's interesting to hear that the Mayo Clinic creates or prepares these drugs prior to taking the mobile unit out, as that's kind of how we would have to do in our center. And I don't know of other places in our county or anywhere else in the state that actually have a on the ground unit preparing, as that would be a difficult thing to compound in the sterile environment. And so I'm interested to hear if anybody else knows of this. I think there's some comments coming in and how that would work, but we've had to keep this in a centralized approach to compounding for safety of the therapy and sterility.
And that has been the feedback from our pharmacy partners here, is just because of sterility issues, particularly when you're using double or combined monoclonal antibody therapy, which is being done more often now. It's more difficult. If you use BAM lenivimab alone, maybe you could do that on site, but our practice still has to be, you know, since our pharmacists can prepare them right before the vehicle leaves for infusion.
This is John. I'd say on average around the country, because I'm familiar with most of these sites now, I think they primarily the medications are compounded separately from the patients, but in a lot of cases it's not very far. And just so everybody's clear, it could be done at the bedside in the right setting. I just want to be clear with everybody. So, you know, in some place very distant or a kind of setting where it would normally be tough, you could do it that way.
So question I have for all of you, and I don't see a lot of the infusion centers. I had a friend that got sick, and so we started to look online. How readily available is this therapy for people who may meet criteria? Do you have any perspective on that?
Well, I can answer that quickly. The issue is no longer supply, and for those of you who remember the experience last summer with remdesivir, I would say that we've now seen this with multiple products. When something rolls out, there's a big and understandable ethical problem because it by definition is going to be scarce. It would not be ethical to hold it back, say, until we have enough for everyone. So therefore, anything new that comes out is going to be almost by definition in short supply and therefore require some form of allocation. And that's why the government got involved, which was to maintain fundamental fairness as best as we could while encouraging use and moving the product as well as possible. However, I want to say categorically that these medications are not in short supply now. And the system has changed to direct ordering. And if there's one thing I want you to remember from today, it's if you would like to give these antibody products, all you have to do is ask. The product is no cost to the system. And as you've heard, it does take logistical organization and that sort of thing, but the drugs are available.
And Jeff, there's a website from the HHS as well as different health departments that lists the active infusion sites. So if you just go to them, they should list the facilities.
If you go to Combat COVID, that has a link at the very top. That's a good one just to remember.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
And one other thing to kind of emphasize is some programs in the past this was restricted by states, but it's now wide open. Correct me if I'm wrong, John. We can now infuse anybody that comes to our facilities, in contrast to some directives in the past, just because there's not a scarcity of supply. So if you have a patient that will require one and are eligible, note also that many centers are open 7 days a week. Others are just during the weekdays, but there should be always a facility that should accommodate even during the weekends and holidays.
Thank you all. We're right at the top of the hour. So Rick, I think I wanted to say thank you to all of our presenters. Thank you, Dr. Rasenbold. Thank you, Dr. Red. Thank you, Dr. Haste. Truly grateful for your expertise and your wisdom. Thank you so much. And Rick, I'm going to go ahead and turn it back to you.
Yeah, Jeff, thanks. With the attention that we actually have put on monoclonals, certainly from the U.S. government, but also from, in working with ECHO to highlight monoclonals, emerging antibodies, emerging therapeutics in the outpatient setting. It's been a extraordinary saga where the thirst, the interest in trying to make this happen has not waned at all. Early on, there was a lot of, well, is this really going to work? And John, thank you for being not just a cheerleader, but you made it happen, and it's worked. That I remember very early on, well, we want to keep people out of the hospital, and yeah, is that actually going to happen? And it's actually happened. But the arc of this, the textbooks that will be written on this is fascinating, because it's okay, we have this new therapy, we turned it on, it was limited access, now we have total access, but now it's the quest to find the patients and going out and getting them. Literally going in mobile units, and Raymond, I think you were talking about the homeless shelters, and so that's at least in my clinical experience, we've never had that. We never had that one before, where we've actually gone out and sought out these people to help us and to help them at the same time. So yeah, we ought to keep focusing on it and what the new dimensions are. And Raymond, like for instance, the mobile units, the integration with the paramedics. We've had rounds on this that have ranged from just, you know, the EMS monoclonal and actually a critical access hospital that like turn things around remarkably. So we just need to like stay on point with this one for sure, especially the variant piece, because it's not going away. So with that, thanks very much to our participants. Great chat. People aren't shy. They remain not shy. And to our panelists, thanks very much for joining us. And to our speakers, really great presentations. John Red, you're a busy guy, just as the other presenters are, and really appreciate your joining us and leading the charge, at least from the federal side with the monoclonals for sure. Jeff, you've done a masterful job in convening these and supporting the round. Really made them extraordinarily more robust than certainly we could have done alone. So with that, thanks to all. Again, next or on Thursday, we're going to be doing medical education. Focus on that because we see certainly the issue of staffing and the future of staffing. We'll also be continuing to listen to you participants to try to develop the next rounds. Certainly there's going to be a need for focus on long haul, certainly the mental health challenges, as well as many others with the variants and what we're seeing currently with the uptick in cases. So with that, please take care of yourselves. We desperately need you as a country. So with that, thanks all, and we'll see you on the next one. Bye.
Thanks,
Bye all.
everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.